person in the video. And so we'll talk about Cayman Island, the experience, their perspective, the culture, and we talk about it in comparison to Canada. So Mark, could you share with us from the video some of the things that you can identify with? Mark?
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Spence. Yeah, I've asked to give a quick overview of the video. Hopefully, most of you were able to watch it. If you haven't, I would certainly encourage you to do so. Um, the video was prepared as a part of the preparations for International Men's Day celebrations here in the Cayman Islands in 2018, and was done a local filmmaker in conjunction with the local college film students. What was interesting is while there were many reasons why they were absent, that early on.
Mark, I'm not hearing you very clear. I don't know if you can speak up a little louder or turn up your mic.
I'm sorry, you broke up there. But yeah, there was many different reasons why fathers were absent, but the upshot was they were absent certainly in the Cayman Islands for many, many years. Men left and went to sea. The women raised the children, managed the houses, built in many ways built the country. The men were off at sea. In my generation in Canada, a lot of our fathers went to war, and while obviously they came back, otherwise we wouldn't have been ever really come back because of what they'd seen and heard and experienced in war. Came back. One of the great comments in one of the speakers was, "He was there but not present," and that was certainly something that men spoke about. My father's generation, they knew how to work, but they weren't so good on the emotional stuff and the intimacy and the nurturing that goes along with parenting. Speakers talked about a therapist. He talked about how men only when they were compelled to come in for help or something. But otherwise, on a volunteer basis, he just didn't see men coming in, acknowledging it was hard to ask for help. And, at the same time, he was well aware, and he referred to a number of recent suicides in the Cayman Islands, all of which were men. Talked about the challenge of depression in terms of many men suffering from depression, made worse because they're less inclined to go seek help. The question was like, how do you learn how to be a dad, especially if your father was not really present when you were growing up, and that it was we needed to make it easier for people to get help. It was a short segment in the film about how, for older men at least, men's sheds have become to be a resource across the UK, Australia, Ireland, into Canada. We have one here now in the Cayman Islands, because men often do better communicating shoulder to shoulder rather than face to face. Back to that fear of connection or not being accepted that's maybe perhaps behind and face. Speakers also talked about new ways to gather. There's an organization on island called the 1,000 Men March, and they've come together to talk about a new way of becoming a man and being a man. And they've had some annual marches and runs on Father's Day to try and bring men together across here. Speakers also referred to the YWCA and some of the things honored young men and who making a real contribution to their communities. There's a segment profiling the Boys to Men program at one of our public high schools, John Gray School, that really works with a group of young men there around how to be a man, and works with them around staying in school and dealing with some of the crises they deal with, etc. and the need, just reminding us of the need to be proactive in terms of responding to young men, because otherwise we end up being reactive in terms of dealing with and those kinds of things. But brief mention of adverse childhood events, because absence of a father is certainly considered an adverse event. And the sort of final note, one of the speakers spoke to about the yearnings, and that that was an important part of what we saw men dealing with, is they were yearning for love and respect and connection. So watch the movie when you get a chance.
Thank you so much, Mark, for sharing. Dr. Niles, I know that you, as a therapist, family therapist, researcher, you too would have a lot of experience in the area working with families, with men. Share from your experience and what you saw in the movie, what you would want to pass on to the listeners this evening.
But firstly, I concur with Mark. I think what's touching is that same question: how do I learn? Who teaches? And I think that is a cry throughout the communities. And wherever you go, you can see that need. We can see but you compliment, of course, the efforts. You compliment the fact that there is some kind of identity, cognitively, culturally, uh, traditionally, that men have taken from their grandparents, their parents, and of course their peers, more so their peers, because that's where you're able to really freely say what you want to say, even though what you're hearing may not be compliant, but it is still a part of that community, and that conversation is important. In my experiences as a therapist, the sadness is that the men do not willingly, or should I say, outrightly claim a need for help. It's like, I do my best. What happened? As a good father, and I always try to help them to see that. Of course, on this chair, I'm not accusing you, but I don't have to say that because they always feel accused. That's one of the issues of emasculation about men. That's one of the key areas about how you father, because you hear a lot of people saying, "Don't be like your father." I don't want to be like your father, and so there's that type of stigma that really corrupts. And I use the word corrupt because it does not augur well for any kind of edification or I want to develop. Because even if I try, somebody will say, "Yeah, he's still like your father." Or he can't get it right because you know where you come from. You just like your father. So that your father thing seems to be a generational context that goes from one generation to the other. And so that the present day man does feel very vulnerable in terms of how will I change. I have few saying yes. Up to yesterday, I had um, a marriage seminar, and a lot of fathers respond. Surprisingly, fathers responded in the chat. And the thing was discipline. So once you start talking about discipline, you're talking about fathering, because if you are yourself about discipline, that's where the very or small gap of abuse comes in. You tend to be abusive, and we realize that discipline is something that a lot of fathers are struggling with because I may know how to say come here or go there, bring my shoe or stand up there or go inside, but when you disobey, it's like as we say it in the Caribbean here, hell break loose, because all that granny teach me, so get that piece of stick or whatever I can reach, like like me, my mother will get a bucket, I think, I just fling it across the road. Or my father had his strap. But today people are looking for straps, so they a piece of stick, anything they get, because there is that need for that discipline. discipline. And I think that's where a part two from that in the program. Well, I had seen the video sometime before. That needs self-discipline in who I am that helps me to be that father. I'll stop here for now.
Thank you, Dr. Niles. Let's go to Diane. Diane, you can talk about the African American context and the whole history, historical background in terms of what you can share with us on that area. Diane?
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I think we need to backtrack a little. Well, for Africans in the diaspora and on the continent, it's a double bubble. And by that I mean socialism for one thing. First of all, when boys make the journey from manhood to adulthood, at some point they're socialized not to express their full range of emotions, the full range of emotions that all of us are born with. That's number one. Number two, they're dealing with transgenerational trauma from transatlantic slave trade and colonialism based on the experiences of their ancestors and the healing that was not done. And the trauma leaves an imprint in the DNA, and that's transmitted generationally. So those are the two things that they're dealing with. So until there is this healing for soul, boys and Africans, to a certain extent, there's always going to be a father wound from the sense of distance, because of the systems that they have to navigate, and because of the trauma and the terror that's in their DNA, because the DNA carries memories. Now, there are ways to handle that. In addition to that, they're being bombarded, like all men are, with mixed signals about masculinity. They're getting it from the mainstream media. They're getting it from film. They're getting it from television sitcoms. So everybody has a lot of confusion. If you're a male, you have a lot of confusion about what it is. You know, society is telling you have to be strong. You're socialized to be strong. You're socialized not to be violent, and that's unhealthy. If anyone jump in.
Diane?
I think she's having internet problems.
Yeah.
Okay.
While we are waiting on Diane to get back in, I just wanted to talk a little about. Are you back in?
Yeah, I'm having some tech.
Yes. Okay.
Yes, I'm back in. I apologize for the technical difficulties that I've seen over here.
Were you finished, or were you finished, Diane?
I'm finished. If anyone wants to jump in and comment on that, that's fine,
I
or
wanted
we
to,
can proceed.
yes, I wanted to talk about the healing aspect. We talk about men being hurt, and many times because of the trauma they went through, the experiences they had, you find that when it comes to having your own family, they take that pain, that hurt, unless there's healing, they take it over into their own relationship. And we find there's a generation, one after the next, of pain and hurt, and no, there's no healing. And so it's so important for us to really work with the young men who have been hurt, whether it is through divorce, whatever kind of experience, childhood experience they may have had, that would have caused some kind of trauma. It is important for us to really work with them and help them to reach a stage of healing. Because unless they heal, they will continue to heal others. As we say, that certain people hurt others. So it's so important for us to understand the importance of allowing men and our young men to get healing and deliverance, as we would say, from their past hurt before we can move on. So I just wanted to add that um, to the whole context in which you were speaking. And to me, I don't know if Dr. Niles or Mark wanted to share anything, but to me, the African men in the Caribbean and also American tend to walk around with a lot of pain and a lot of hurt because we have been cultured in such a way that men don't talk about their issues. Men, they keep it inside. They don't share it. And when a situation arises, they just lash out. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that because that really gives a context in terms of the behavior of men, in terms of their not sharing, they're not really talking about the pain and the hurt. I don't know if anybody want to talk about that aspect.
Yes, I think it's important. Diane mentioned that earlier. From that transatlantic issue, from the boys have to be strong. Therefore, the men have to be strong. But what is strength? Strength is not showing weakness. Strength is not identifying that there's an issue. And therefore, it allows you, rather, it leaves the man to feel that whatever you are doing or whatever you have interpreted as a system is correct. And that's it. So that for when that is defied in any way, you lash out. And therefore, you become an abuser, both to yourself and to the child, whether male or female. And so I think it's important for us to really redefine from a cultural perspective, or maybe from a national perspective, what being strong is or what not being strong is. Because I think as we grow up, from my age, if I cried, I was told by friends, hey, you're sissy or you're a little girlish, and so that we were not encouraged to be male if we cried. If you showed any kind of sympathy to something, just a emotion of saying, of caring. And I was shocked even in my teenage life and even in my as a married man. People say, "Hey, don't get so what was it word mushy? Don't get so mushy and so don't, about this thing. Be strong, be strong." But so therefore, I think we have been denied as male men. Whether, and I don't know if it's just the Caribbean, because I think the even within Canada, I know I've worked with some guys there. That kind of interracial context, especially from Chinese and East Indian, those racial mixes, they're already very quiet and very introverted. So to speak out, there's a silence that you get, and you don't know exactly what's going on there. So I think there's a need for us to look at the re-educating from the grass, from the bottom, from home, teaching boys, teaching males, hey, crying is not bad. It is strong. Crying is strong. Caring is strong. Loving is strong. So when I go to discipline my son who is crying, I am not going to discipline my son because he shouldn't cry. What are you crying for? Yeah, boy, shut up. Whap, whap. Don't cry. So that we approach the discipline, we approach the loving, we approach the caring with that same hardness, that same feeling. And I think it's something we have to really address from the grassroots level.
Mark?
I would like to add that. I'm sorry, go ahead, Dr. Spence.
No, go ahead. You go ahead. That was all.
No,
Go ahead,
I was
Diane.
just going to say, I think we need to rewrite the narrative on masculinity. And what we need to do is redefine strength. And what
Yes.
strength really is being vulnerable. And it takes a lot of courage and a lot of strength to be vulnerable because you're taking a risk. When you are vulnerable, you're standing in front of another person, spiritually, psychologically, and emotionally naked. You have no idea how this person is going to respond to you. Are they going to embrace you or are they going to dismiss you? And so, yeah, now that's strength.
Thank you. Mark, I wanted to know if you wanted to add anything to this.
Well, if I may, I just want to harken back to the transgenerational trauma, and certainly the example that I observed in working in the Arctic in Canada, well, in other places in Canada too, though, is the trauma that was inflicted upon our First Nation people, our Indigenous peoples, through the individual to sort of beat the Indian out of the person. And I think you can so see how that sort of epigenetic kind of trauma has been passed down. And, it's only been very recently that those behaviors which people saw and criticized, 20, 30 years ago, we kind of know now why they're there, because we're increasingly confronted with the evidence of the degree to which, the dominant colonial society sought to break down and destroy original culture and whatever, and that's it's just the healing is just.
Yeah.
Can I just add that this thing about men not crying, it impacts the male-female relationship. And I will give you an example. Oh, I guess about 5 years ago, a young woman, I guess she'd been married maybe about 3 years. And she mentioned to me that her husband, who had been raised by his uncle, was grieving. Well, she says to me, "Oh," he said, "my husband just lost his uncle, and that was the only father figure in his life." And so I said to her, I said, "How is he responding to that?" And she says, "Oh, well, I think he's responding okay." So I said, "Well, is he talking about it? Are you talking to him about it? Are you asking him, how do you feel? What's going on with you?" And she said, "No, well, we didn't have those discussions." She said, "But the funeral is coming up," and she says, "I'm a little worried." So I said, "Well, what's going on?" So she said to me, "What do I do if he cries?" We don't, with this narrative about masculinity and men being strong and that sort of stuff, we women internalize that too. And as a result of that, we respond to you as your spouse in a certain way. So this young woman didn't know what to do. So I told her, I said, "Well, if he feels that safe in front of you, if he respects you that much to cry, whatever you do, you have to let him know that in no way the fact that he's standing there crying emasculates him." And I just said, "Well, you handle it the way you would handle it if it was a woman in front of you crying. This is someone that you love that's crying. Embrace him, hold him, embrace him, let him cry, let him express his emotions. And once that's done, you make sure that you let him know in no uncertain terms that his masculinity is not diminished. Because men let women know, the women in the know, that they're expressing these emotions. But if they feel rebuffed or if they feel emasculated, they will never ever do it in front of you again. They will just shut down and they won't do it. Why? Because they can't trust you. And they're looking at it as, you're not trusting me, you're not respecting me. Oh, that's my take on
Diane,
it.
may I ask a question? Diane, how will that impact, therefore, the man fathering daughters? Do you see the connection?
Oh, I'm sorry. The father wound on daughters? Is that the question?
That same example you use.
Okay.
That's same. I was
The
just
father wound on daughters.
That same example
well,
you use about the weak.
Daughters feel. The daughters look at it this way: if my father didn't, if my father didn't think I was valuable enough or worthy enough to stay in my life, then no man is going to do the same, is going to stay in my life, and they act on that. So they sabotage every relationship that they have. And so when a good man comes into their life, a man that honors them and respects them and provides for them and respects their humanity, subconsciously, they don't realize that they're doing it, but subconsciously they sabotage the relationship because they're punishing that man for what did not happen between them and their father.
That is so true. And in therapy, we can identify Mark can as a counselor, Dr. Niles also. We recognize that clients will come to us, and talk about their past issues and how it's impacted on, their present relationship. And when we're talking about men or women who have been abused, neglected by their father, you recognize that it's very difficult for them to accept when they really get a true partner, when they get a genuine partner. They always feel that the partner, reflects what the father did to them. So they don't accept and don't appreciate. There's always that concern of one, they feel to not like my father. So that is an issue that we really have to deal with as we move forward when we talk about redefining masculinity, when we're talking about teaching men and even our women, teaching them, that we need to understand and listen. Not every man will behave the same way. Not every man will behave as their father, and that we have to be able to accept, and recognize that they are different men, and we have to be able to understand, how to deal with them when they come. So that's a very important aspect. But I wanted to talk about in terms of the whole issue of the culture, men not asking for help, because we have a lot of men who hurting, and there seems to be a culture men feel that they don't need to ask for help. I don't know, what are your thoughts on it?
Who's going first? What exactly you looking at, Joanne? Before I go any further.
Okay, all right. So we're talking about the culture, how men were brought up, socialized. And because of the whole issue started stemming from the crying and making them feel that they're not, they're macho, they're not supposed to cry. So they feel that, okay, as a macho man, if I need help, I don't go to a therapist. I wouldn't go to a therapist because I feel if I go to a therapist, other men will laugh at me. I'm a macho man. And I think that have a lot to do with culture, because we may find, I don't know what it is like in Canada, Mark, but in the Caribbean, and some of the Black American men, I understand, do the same in terms of they don't go to therapy. So you find that therapists will talk about a lot of women coming, but men don't want to come. And if they happen to come, they're not talking. Um, how do you feel the culture impacted on their behavior?
Because Joanne, most of the therapists are females. Most of the issues would have come out of the fact that, hey, my mother emasculated me, my mother didn't encourage me, or my spouse, my and so to go back to a female to hear, or to even to have the threat of emasculation, or to hear that you're doing something wrong, you're not fathering well, you're abusive, you're not good. It's difficult. And I, even for the men now, you are embarrassed to use that word. to go to a man to who will may feel, hey, what kind of man you is? You let me down, man. You let me down. You know? So it's six of one, half a dozen of the other, you know. So that I think we really, Joanne, have to go. It goes back to really going back to the communities and having what we call psychoeducational programs dealing with that
Yeah.
concept of acceptance, working that security between mother and father, that nurturing that we lost or didn't have as babies, as children, and growing up as young men. And as Diane was saying just now, when you reach that place, there's that hurt, there's that unfamiliar relationship that I don't know how. I don't know how to love, or
Yeah.
what I want as love. I can't get it because, you know, I'm afraid to. I never got it before. I don't know how to find it because I've always had abuse, whether it's my uncle, my father. It was me, and then with my mother didn't help with my auntie because they also abused my parents, my father. Sorry, and
Yeah.
that's a continuum. That's a continuum of abuse. If I testify of abuse, you hear it, you will they'll abuse me for abusing. Nobody wants to bring the healing. Nobody wants to
Yeah.
bring that reformation, that transformation. I think that is my pain today, working with the men I work with. And some of them don't think, one more thing, some of them don't think they can change. That is how I is. That is how I is. You know,
And
I
you know,
can't
even
change.
before, yes, before we even go to Diane and Mark, I just wanted to add that when you talked about the men not going to therapy because of as another woman, we have a problem in terms
Mhm.
of men going to women because sometimes when the father absent, the mother is taking care of them. They go into the school, the teachers are females. And then they sometimes they go to the police station to report a matter. And when they go to the police station and the man talks to them, he said, what happened to you, boy? What kind of man is you come in to complain about a woman? So you know they always feel as though there's some sort of rejection. And that's a problem. So they keep the things to themselves. I don't know, Mark, what has been your
Mm.
experience in that area?
Well, not a clinician, just not had any work in that thing. I think one of the things, and it's not a very direct way, but I think when I see what the men shed, movement, older men, is give them that shoulder to shoulder space to talk about, and whether it's physical health issues, prostate health, mental health, they talk, at the shed, and then I'm hoping and I'm imagining that they, see there's a different way to be, and that they can share that then with their, adult sons, and so I think there's a nice indirect one that can hopefully UK and in Ireland. I mean, the map is just full of sheds, and a lot of them really seem to focus on that. Quiet way of introducing the physical and mental health stuff that men have historically avoided, because men avoid physical health issues as well, right? No, I don't need to go to the doctor. I
Ah,
don't. I'm fine.
Yes, yes.
Fine is just a flesh wound. You know,
tell us about it.
the one thing I wonder about, I put it. Interviewed a bunch of government officials lately in the Eastern Caribbean, and they talked about how during a lot more stuff happened online in terms of therapy and stuff. And I'm wondering, does that make it easier for men to reach out for help because they're not sitting in a room? They don't have to go into a waiting room, particularly let's say in a small island nation where you know everybody and it could be your cousin that's behind the desk. Does that help? Are you seeing that where people ended up going online because of COVID? Has that helped more
Well,
be more
I
open?
have always had a lot of my success is lime, what we call in Trinidad liming. I would take you to a restaurant, or we will go by some cafe. Well, in the past 2 years, it has been, or 3 years, it has been Starbucks. Since Starbucks came to Trinidad, I have done a lot of work with men, basically only actually with men at Starbucks. It worked because they even though there are people around, that individual private, it's like when you're sipping some coffee or whatever they're drinking, tea, and they're able to talk. I have had some progress with the online. And I think, Mark, what you're hitting is right. That individualism, that kind of privacy, where I can trust that environment, and I don't feel that it's in a room being psychoanalyzed. The coffee seems to take that away. The Starbucks, that environment, and it's more friendly and participative. And it's a man to man. It's a man to man. I could tell you one little joke here. I went with one from my office, and usually in my office I have on a jacket and tie. I'm very British here. And when I sat down, the guy was like, "Where you come from?" He went out. I said, "When I came from work." Whoa! So I said, "Let's talk." And I just had to pull the tie off. I could not believe I I had to take my tie off. I left the jacket on as soon as I took my tie off, it was like and I says, "Kenneth, huh, okay, Kenneth, I have to really work on that." So I think all those things are really important.
Thanks for sharing, Diane.
I would, what needs to happen, among other things, we have to create safe harbor, a safe harbor for men and boys, whatever it is, where they can, there has to be a place where they can go to, where they can feel safe to be vulnerable. And that's something that each one of us can create ourselves. For instance, you're a woman, and you have a son, and your husband or your fiance. Um, there should be discussions on a daily basis. You know, how was your day? What happened at work? What happened at school? There should be a time where you just sit around, whether it's the dinner table or what. Like when I was growing up at my home, the dinner table, because everybody worked, I was a latchkey kid. And so everybody worked. So we used the dinner table to go around the table and talk about what happened, what didn't happen, that sort of thing. And then while we were doing the dishes or that sort of thing, if it was a major problem, then after dinner, then we would go and do a one-on-one. Well, this is how you solve this or that sort of thing. So you have to. We cannot allow the men and boys in our midst to be um, um, to carry this burden around. So if there's a male in your household, you see, hi, it's your husband, your boyfriend, your fiance, whatever. Hi, honey, how are you? How was your day? Do you need time to relax a little bit? Maybe he needs time to relax a little bit. So give him 15 minutes to just relax and unwind. Um, and then after that, you just weave it into the conversation. How are you? Of course, you get the usual answer. Oh, just a normal day, the normal routine, blah, 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 blah. Um, or they may say, oh, I had a bad day. Uh, but you have to probe a little bit and you just do it gently. But things like responses like, oh, well, you know, you know, every day is like every day. What's the big deal? Or it's all good. That's not a good answer. You need and to sort of probe and you have to do it gently, but there's ways to probe. The other thing is you have to for when I'm dealing with people on one-on-one, I try to step outside of myself, particularly the people that are very close to me in my inner circle, to try to feel what they're feeling. And that energy. So even if they tell me everything's fine, I know it's not. And so I just probe gently, and I kind of coaxed them to tell me, and eventually they will, when they feel comfortable enough, they will tell me. Now that takes time and it takes energy, but that's something that we can do one-on-one. It might save someone's life, because the suicide rate for men and boys is going through the roof. It's horrendous.
Yeah.
I don't know if the internet was dropping
Go ahead,
a
Joanne.
while in between. Yeah. So I didn't hear what Diane said last, but as we looked at a number of issues, we saw that caused the Caribbean men, and not just Caribbean, but the African American men to behave in a particular way, and we identify things like in terms of their culture, the trauma that they would have experienced, and so on, that would have caused their behavior. We want to start looking at solutions because there are many men who might be listening to us this evening, and or women, and they may want to find solutions in terms of how could we help that man change his landscape. And we want to start talking now about what can we do different. And I was looking at a video, and I remember Mark talking about mentoring, and I am very passionate, Mark, about mentoring. I have been really pushing that in this country because I believe that's one of the ways we should go. Um, and I want us to talk about solutions now. What can we do? How can we be really change the landscape of men and the whole behavior and so on? Diane spoke about one of the things Diane spoke about earlier. She mentioned I'm trying to remember exactly. I'll get back to that. But Diane, you did bring a solution to us. I'll remember in a while. I don't know if you could
Well,
repeat what you said.
as it relates to souls of African descent in the diaspora and on the continent who have transgenerational trauma, a part of the issue, well, part of the solution is, I will say this as gently as I can, um, uh, is to deal with our historical amnesia.
Yep.
We have to come to grips with what happened to us, and this all of this ugliness. But it's not about being angry about who did what, because we're all caught up. We're all caught up in in a conundrum that was created by people we never knew, never will know, who made decisions and actions that put us in the position where we're all in now. So it's not about being mad and pointing fingers at who did what to whom. It's about healing. So
Yeah.
until we deal with that,
And a key point, a
the,
key
the
point you
reason
made,
being,
sorry.
the reason being is our ancestors didn't get healing. Frankly speaking, we all should be on the psychiatrist's couch. If you really understood what happened, we, including me, if you
That's
really
important.
understood what happened,
Yeah, but one of the points that
Yeah.
Diane that you made was redefining masculinity because we really feel a macho man must not cry, must not show emotions, and I think that's one of the things that we
well,
talk about
but
as we move
yeah,
forward. I think that's important also. Yes, Dr. Niles, you were
well,
saying something.
well,
But
but
Sorry.
but this has a lot to do from. This is where the double bubble comes in.
Uh-huh.
For men and boys of African descent, and they've got they've got a they've got 10,000 pounds of trauma transmitted through the genes going back 500 years. They come out of the womb with a father wound, and you compound that. They come out that with all of that trauma embedded in their genes, and then you tell them, "Don't cry, man up, be strong," and 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 they're dealing with that. I mean, that's insanity.
But Diane, how do you appreciate that as a reality? Because that's how you are. You see, when I got married, I present myself as I am. When my faults or my weaknesses come out in basically my communication, my relationship, and my disciplining of my children, which woman is going to decide, hey, oh, I need to sit down with you and get a therapist and go back in your past and look at transgenerational trauma to know why you behave like this? Hell no. You see, right now, I cannot deal with this stupidness. You see, you're a big man. You should not have married me. I should not have married you. You go back where you come from. So we have to also teach the woman,
But see,
the mothers,
that is a
to,
issue.
to accept
That is an issue.
those
I hear you.
voices.
I hear you.
So you come and say, okay, I was molested as a man, and now I am molesting. What?
Well,
Police,
no, no, no,
jail.
no, no, not quite. No, let's say your great grandfather went through that.
Mm,
Let's all that was trauma. Trauma gets inside of every fiber of your being. And let's say your grandfather didn't wasn't given uh, a, a vehicle by which he could express that pain. He carried that pain, that trauma, that inside of him. He internalized it. It gets in your cells, it gets in your blood, it gets in your
yes.
breath, it gets in everything. And it's there until you deal with it. It doesn't go away. It's like a
Are you
problem.
willing to help
And
me
the
go through
problem,
that?
but so there has to be a way of expressing that, of acknowledging that.
But Diane, is the wife, the
But
mother
we
willing?
have to understand. We have to understand that everybody that comes to us has some kind of trauma,
That's right.
I'm not denying that. I'm just asking if
and and
Joanne, if
and
you,
and and
if
act
my wife
accordingly.
is willing to help me.
Now, what is okay? So you're talking about as a serious thing he's talking about here, Dr. Niles. Um, if I'm not trained, I don't recognize the importance of going back in past. As a therapist, I can tell someone, well, okay, my son or something, I will go back in the past and say, okay, let's go through and see what has been your past experiences and let's relate it to what's happening now. But as a mother who's frustrated, whose children give them problems and so on, they ain't going in no past. They don't want to hear about
No,
past. They are dealing with
bust
a
your tail.
young man who I don't let the police take you. If his husband go your way, don't come back. So the fact is, unless you're trained, and even if you're trained, when you are going through that personally, sometimes you're not willing to go through that experience in terms of going back in past and going
When I
to
yeah,
therapists.
when I worked with probation department, I was in charge of the family therapy unit. That was some mother says, Mister, where you get that talk from? You have no idea how my son behaves. You have no idea. He's a wicked beast. I am putting him in the institution. And I said to her, let's sit down and find out how did this happen? What was he exposed to? Exposed?
What it
I
triggers.
yeah, so that there was no willingness to sit down and to work out at first. I had to have those seminars. I had to have seminar one, seminar two, educate the parent. By which time the son is already in YTC, uh, or at another home with a daughter in another home. But at least there was progress in they being educated, and eventually, maybe some people took 6 months to say, "Okay, I hear you. We will come for therapy." Whew, finally, we will accept the fact that our man child can be helped. And then the father recognized, "Hey, do I need help too?" Thank you, Lord. But it really takes a lot. But it is excruciating.
So we understand the
I'm not
importance of healing. Huh?
suggesting, yeah, I'm not suggesting that it's an overnight thing. Forgive me if I suggested that,
No, no, you
there's
didn't.
this
You
magic
didn't.
formula and poof. It takes a lot of patience and a lot of work.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So we recognize that healing is one of the important aspects for us to move forward. And I want to talk about mentoring. I want to pass it over to Mark, as he spoke about it in the video, I think. But mentoring about young men, particularly,
Mhm.
as we move forward, as a way to move forward. Mark?
Well, I think the program that was profiled in the video was Boys to Men, I say, at one of the public high schools, and I think it's a group, if you just saw in the video, of about 15 to 20 young men, and it's it's run by a local counselor who's also a pastor, and yeah, I think they've done a lot of good work in terms of giving that venue to start talking about things, sharing their father wound stories.
How
Just
do you?
briefly, get down to very practical things. One of the things they do is the boys take their mothers out to a nice meal at a restaurant, and they learn how to pull out the chair. They learn how to, some very traditional kinds of things, but they have no experience in that sort of thing. And
Mhm.
one of the experiences they wanted to give the young boys was that. And I think one of the things that would be really important with a group like that is to use the ACEs research, the ACEs questionnaire. And I love what I heard recently, Perry and Oprah talking with Brene Brown, my social work hero, about, because ACEs shifts the conversation from what's wrong with you, which I think is very threatening to most of us, maybe more so to men, to what has happened to you. And I think the experience
Mhm.
the press
Mhm.
that I've seen in prisons and in like the Paper Tigers documentary about the school in Washington State, it shifts the dynamic. It's like, I'm doing well. Given what I've been through, I'm doing pretty well. And I think that's a really helpful shift for a younger or an older man to make.
Yes, thank you. Um, I don't know if Diane or Kenneth, Dr. Niles, if you want to share anything on the whole mentoring aspect. We're looking at
Well,
moving forward. What kind of, you know,
mentoring has been
recommendations
my
we can.
life. Mentoring has been my life since I got married. We've had over maybe 25, we call them children, young adults in our home, whom we have mentored. Some of them we have brought into our family, and that's how I have. When I say I have 5 children, I have 5 children. Uh, but there some two of those have been meant people who I mentored into my family. Uh, but it's important. And recently, just 2 weeks ago, actually, no, sorry, last week, I told one of the guys I want to reestablish a new forum within the mentoring group that I have. Uh, the only issue that I have with mentoring is the non-mentored. Like when they go out and say, well, I speak to, I am working with, wapen, wapen. You're not your old man, so he's trying to make you like himself. He wants you to be different, but you know who you is. Don't let nobody change you. So I am still working on how to really help the mentees appreciate the value of such a program and not to be threatened by people who feel that who you are, that's who you is and will always be, even though it is negative and it does have its negative impact within their own communities and within their own lifestyles. But it has been successful for me. I have seen men grow from, and I've also had some defeats in terms of the same problem. I remember I had a guy in my house who came in from. I took him off this. I took him from. He was a druggie. Came into my house. I had him there for over 6, 7 months, and then I tried to reunite him with his mother. And when the police took him, I got in police involved. They took him to his mother, and she rejected him in front of the police. He came back and stabbed my back door with a ice pick. I mean, there was the entire top of the back door, and I only thank God he didn't do that to my wife. But it was again one of the issues, I think, that if you are mentoring, and what I've started doing since that was way back in the 80s, is to work with their family members, find family members, because you are working with this particular guy, but when he goes out there, he goes back home or he goes with his friends, it's a whole different situation. And so that it does not impact positively. It takes away, it interferes, and it brings a struggle. Because I want to be one way here, but my peers are saying something else, or my family members are saying something else. So I've had to work the mentorship program with family and friends and
Yeah.
mentee to bring that
Dr.
balance.
Niles,
And I think that's where
yeah.
the struggle is.
Dr. Niles, that's so important because and the model that I use for mentoring, we include the parents in the program because
Yes.
we don't want them to feel apart from the program and that you are taking over their child. But one of the important successes I can talk about with mentoring is that a father was absent in his child's life all the time, and we had somebody mentor that young man. And when the father heard of this other man mentoring his child, he came in and he took up his role. So he was led to take up his role because he saw another man. He felt bad about it. And he took up his role as a father and started being very active in the child's life. And, those are some of the success stories we get out of the mentoring,
Yes. Those I
So,
have such
yeah.
success
So
stories.
that's
Yes.
so
Yes.
important. So we looking at solutions now. We spoke about the healing, going back in the past, dealing with healing of the young men. We talk about the whole redefining masculinity. We also talk about mentoring. And I don't know if there are any other recommendation solutions from any other member of the panel.
I think education is important, Joanne. I have had to encourage some of the men to go back to school and sit with them and do programs, whether it's computer literacy or some basic, what we call CXC subjects, or trade subjects like doing masonry or plumbing or woodwork, but something to empower them because finances is an issue. How do I upkeep myself?
Yeah,
And so that is one of the issues that I think needs to be addressed in terms of the positivity and the solutions. I think we
yeah,
should empower them educationally so that they can be empowered financially. Because of course, our world is if you have no qualifications,
you
you can't
no,
get any
no
job.
finance. Yeah.
Yeah,
I want to
so
read
I've had
from
to.
one of the viewers said that can we have a seminar discussion on helping women to recognize the need for us to help our men in our environment. And I think that's very important.
Oh,
Also, we as women, we really need to help our men. We need to work with them as mothers, as wives. We need brothers and sisters, and so we need to work with our men to help them when we recognize that they need help. That's important.
I
Then
would
we
like to see.
Sorry?
Oh, my apologies. I didn't mean to
No, no,
interrupt.
no. Go ahead. No, that's fine.
Uh,
Go ahead.
I would like to see the work that Mark Nicoll is doing and the work that Dr. Kenneth Niles is doing, getting more exposure. Uh, I think that would help a lot, um, so that what we're discussing now, it gets in the middle of everybody's radar screen, and uh, the thoughts and ideas and solutions and concepts that you two gentlemen have offered are key pieces of the puzzle. And I thank the both of you for your work. And that's all I have to say in terms of solutions.
Yeah. And just going back on Grace Hector, one of the viewers, it's so important for us to really train in terms of the education. It's important for us to train our women, in terms of how to deal with men. Because sometimes as women, we kind of make men demoralized. The way we tell them things, we make them feel like, they're nobody and they just stay quiet, that they say nothing, they don't do anything, they just stay out the children's life because of the things that women may say to hurt them. So that is also important. We have Ross, I think McDonald is saying trauma does dramatically impact, but it isn't more of the psychological issue rather than your DNA or genes being altered. He's asking a question. Yes, he's asking a question in terms of trauma, whether it is in a DNA or it is, okay, so let me read it again. Trauma does dramatically impact, but it isn't but isn't it
But
more of
isn't
a
it more?
psychological issue rather than? So he's asking, is it more a psychological issue rather than a DNA genes problem?
It's all of the above. I say it's all of the above
Yeah,
because if there was no trauma, um, the trauma has an impact on a person's psychological health. Now, you could you could be born and not have any trauma in your ancestral line, but you could have psychological issues based on trauma that happens in the journey from childhood to adulthood.
yeah. And he's always say he
Good
also says,
question, by the way. Great
yeah, yeah.
question.
I don't know if anybody else want to comment on his question, Mark or
Yeah,
Spence,
I think I agree with Diane. It is all of the above.
both.
But
Yeah,
but even though it's DNA, what surfaces more, what becomes more apparent is a psychological issue because we're dealing with behaviors
yeah,
and the cognitive dissonance that impacts the relationships between man and woman, man and child. And of course, the nurturing part of the parenting, when you are impacted negatively with your daughter and son. So it comes down to again that re-educating, that impacting of psychoed, helping men to appreciate themselves.
yeah. Mark, anything on that question?
No, I think that you say it's that the false dichotomy of it's not, you're kind of preloaded if you come with the epigenetic kind of trauma, in your genes, and then you live more of it growing up or in your interactions with the broader society, that much more of a challenge.
I don't know if we realized when Joanne started talking, she mentioned culture. I don't know if we realize how much we may need to have another section to deal with that specifically because even with Roscoe's question, it really, I think there's a whole pie there about that cultural impact. And when Diane talks about the transgenerational trauma, I think it really comes down to that cultural context that we haven't even really touched much on. We've skirted around it, but it's important to see the fabric, how it has woven those tenets of our behavior. And then Mark has a lot with the indigenous people. We have here the Amerindians, but here's the Indians there, and I think we all have some kind of indigenous context
Yeah.
to work
So
from.
culture plays a very important part in the whole
Yes. Mhm.
history of the trauma and so on. You know. So we have been talking for the past hour, and our focus has been ACEs. We're looking at the adverse childhood experiences and the father's wound, and we were looking at some of the things that happen um, among our men, and we also looked at some solutions. And just in identifying solutions again, I want to just reiterate, we spoke about the education, educating our men. We need to educate our women also because our women have to help our men. So we need to educate both parties. We also have to, but I guess we really need to talk about culture in another forum because there's so much about culture that we have to look at when we're looking at addressing these issues. But we spoke about redefining masculinity. We spoke about mentoring, looking at these different areas in terms of how we could help a man to stand up and be a man without feeling that there's something wrong with him if he cry, if he show emotions. we want our men to recognize that, listen, you're an emotional being, and yes, you can cry, you can laugh, you can feel, and you can act in a particular way, but we just have to understand in terms of how do we control that behavior when we become very emotional? How do we control that behavior? Um, how has the past, our past life and our past hurts have impacted us in terms of our behavior now? And we have to start to look at these things and, really get our men to understand what they do now, and fathers especially in terms of what they do now, how it can impact their sons and their daughters later on. I don't know if anyone want to say anything as we prepare to close. Is there anything else anybody want to add?
Uh,
Again, for
uh,
those who came in late, I just want to say Happy Father's Day again for those who may have come in late. We thank you so much for tuning in. Go ahead, Dr. Niles.
I was wondering if Mark could help me here. I mean, Diane talked about the transgenerational context, and for him, in the Cayman Islands, where there is a mix both of the African, the Caucasian, coming from the British and the American, has that impacted any upon your men? That context of having both that kinds of cultures. Oh, well, we go back to culture again or foundations. Did you?
I'm too much of a newbie to really, we have a fairly significant number of foreign workers from, Canada, the UK, the Philippines. Uh, it certainly, um, has an impact, but I just really don't know.
Okay, but it's something I was just thinking of. I think we maybe should leave that alone until we come to the cultural part. But for
Okay.
today, I
So
am
thank you so
excited to
much.
be here.
Sorry, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Dr. Niles. Sorry about that.
I was just
Dr.
wrapping
Niles,
up. Well, thanks.
closing remarks?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, I am glad to have met Diane and to hear her and to share in this time. And I'm really encouraged to go continue in my own quest. I have written 2 books on emasculation. I think I'm going to do my third. I promise a third one. I think this is that when Diane talks about bringing all this to the fore, I think that voice needs to come out in my pen and to really work a little more with the females, as Miss Hector
Oh,
said, to
definitely.
bring that clarity to the home, how to accept the men's weakness, how to accept those DNA, cultural, ancestral issues, and to bring that breaking and that deliverance for our future. I think the concept of discipline is important, and that is something we need to look at because think about the transgenerational trauma. We knew our the slave masters whipped our forefathers, were beaten a lot, and there's a lot of that trauma comes a lot from not just mentally but physically, and the fear of ever being touched, the fear of being flogged, the fear of being told you're wrong. Those reactions are still sometimes very real in how we handle our own masculinity. And I really appreciate the forum today. And thanks, Joanne, for guiding us through very well.
Thank you, Dr. Niles. Closing remarks, Mark, closing remarks.
Well, I just think that, how I met Adrian and whatever is around this notion of that there's many learnings from the adverse childhood events research that I think, even I'm a policy wonk. So when I look at social protection, social services, kinds of services across the Caribbean, and I talk to people who are running these programs in other countries, I really think there's the an approach, a trauma aware approach that takes into account the findings of this research can really help reframe things for the people we're trying to help, and can significantly have an impact, as they have in the UK and the US, in better outcomes for vulnerable people. And that's my big takeaway.
Thank you. And for the Queen, Queen Diane, we left the Queen for last. Queen Diane, your
Well,
closing remarks.
thank you. I agree with Dr. Niles about bringing women into this equation in terms of healing, and that girls have to be socialized too. If we're going to re-socialize boys, we have to re-socialize girls too, so that they understand that a boy or a man who fully expresses his full set of emotions, that there's nothing wrong with him in crying. We also have to socialize girls and women's, re-socialize them as to the role that they play in the psychological, emotional, and spiritual health of men. And we also need to teach them how to be partners and how to work to be partners and equal partners. At the same time, we need to, men and women need to have discussions with each other about their childhood, particularly if they're engaged and they're planning on getting married, because just a lot of things can be uncovered. A lot of issues can be resolved in this discussion, because a lot of times we don't really know what went on in that other person's childhood. For instance, Mr. Mark Nicoll talked about Oprah saying, to look at what happened to me, and nobody asked that. What happened to you? Nobody asked that question. But here again, Dr. Niles has some great solutions. Mark Nicoll has some great solutions. This forum has made me think about things I had not thought about. We need to have more discussions like this. We need to have Dr. Niles and Mark Nicoll's works expanded more and brought more into the public square. And Dr. Spence, we need to have your work brought more into the public square as well. And I'm just I'm excited, I'm inspired, and I'm energized by this discussion. And I thank you all, and thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, panelists. We really appreciate you taking your time off this Father's Day to share with us and to share with the listening audience. We thank you so much for being here. We know that the fathers will be well educated as we were this evening, understanding some of the issues that impact in their lives and causing particular behaviors. And we know that change will come as we continue to educate and to inform the public. We know that change will eventually come. We want to say, all our viewers, we want to say thank you so much for being here this evening, and we want to thank the panelists for taking the time. God richly bless you all and have a great evening.
Thank you, and happy Father's Day to all the fathers. Thank you all.
Thank you, Dan. Nice meeting you. Good to see you guys. Good to see you, Joanne. Bye, Mark.
Yes, looking forward to seeing you all again.
Yes, certainly.